I am here with Zuby. Zuby, thank you so much for joining me.
Happy to be here, man. How you doing?
I'm great. You're listening to the Quick Thought on That podcast, and Zuby is. I mean, some people might remember you from 2019 when you identified as a woman during the period when you were. You broke the record of the weightlifting women's contest.
British women's deadlifting.
Right.
Yeah.
And but little did we know that you were also a great thinker. I think the best word that comes to mind is a polymath. You're a rapper, political commentator, producer of all kinds of content. You coach. You grew up in Saudi Arabia. Is there anything that you would like to add to this this list?
I do a lot of things, man. It depends on how long you want the list to do. I'm also an author. I wrote a book called Strong Advice, Zuby's Guide to Fitness for Everybody. I'm a podcast host. I run my own podcast, Real Talk with Zuby, and all-around creative entrepreneur.
Love it. Now, you are from the UK, but you were brought up in Saudi Arabia, and your interests lie very much to the context of America. Why is that?
Yeah, sure. So I've got a real unique background. So my family background is originally from Nigeria. I moved to Saudi Arabia when I was a baby. So I went to school there up until I was 11 years old. And then I went to boarding school in the UK. I was also born in the UK, so I'm British by birth. And then when I was in Saudi Arabia, I was in an international school. So I grew up surrounded with a lot of Americans. Most of my teachers were American. That's actually why I have the accent that I do and why I don't really sound British. And then through everything that I've done, I've built a very, very global audience through what I've done. The USA is actually my biggest market for everything I do, from my music to my podcast to my book. And so I've got hundreds of thousands of followers and supporters in the USA, and I keep an eye on what's going on there as well. But I'm interested in the world in general. I've grown up in such a, I don't know the word, international and eclectic way that my view isn't really just based around one country, let alone one city, but I try to view things from a more holistic, wide perspective.
Right. Today, I want to touch upon various topics, freedom of speech, COVID-19, freedom in general. Mm-hmm. But I want to start with culture, because I know that you think about culture a lot within the context of these topics. So to begin with, let's start with freedom of speech. What is the greatest threat to freedom of speech today?
People not using it. Mm-hmm. I think that freedom of speech is not just something you talk about, but it's something that you do. And I think if you don't use your freedom of speech, you ultimately lose your freedom of speech. So I don't think the greatest infringements on it are necessarily directly coming from the government. I think it's happening more on a social and a cultural level. If you look at a country like the USA, which I'd say has the strongest protections in terms of legal immunity from, there's no type of hate speech laws, etc. But there are so many, millions and millions of Americans, the majority, in fact, are afraid to voice even basic opinions, right? For someone to say, oh, I voted for Trump, or I believe this, or I believe that. A lot of people are terrified to say it. They're afraid of cancel culture. They're afraid of even losing friends, being deplatformed, being censored by social media platforms or whatever else it may be. And of course, people should be accountable for their speech. With every right come responsibilities. So saying that people should have freedom of speech doesn't mean that you support absolutely everything that anybody says. But if someone says something that you think is wrong or is crossing the line or is out of order or you merely disagree with, then you can also use your own speech to combat that or to discuss it or to debate it. And so I think the greatest threat is people being too afraid to do that. I'm a big fan of conversation. I think that if you really think about it, whether you're talking about individuals or you're talking about even a romantic relationship or friends or a marriage or whatever it is, there are only three ways to deal with any conflict. Number one is discussion, conversation, and debate. Number two is separation, segregation, divorce. And number three is physical violence. That's all we have. So with any conflict, whether it's between two countries or it's between two individuals or two groups, these are always the only three options. And I'm not a big fan of options 2 and 3. So I always recommend option one should stay open.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, Christopher Hitchens mentioned that you don't get the rights that you're not willing to fight for. So the interesting thing about freedom of speech today is that it's not compulsory not to use certain aspects of free speech, but people, like you mentioned, are afraid to do it because of the implications that it might have in the aftermath. So especially with regards to all of these topics about race, about COVID-19 and these things. You have mentioned, I think it was on trigonometry a few months back, where you mentioned that there is a link between woke-ism, tyranny, and social division. Can you elaborate on that?
Wow. Okay, that's a deep
big one.
Yeah. There's a lot to get into there. So sorry, ask the question one more time. Let me make sure I get this right.
So I was wondering, because it's not mandated that you can't really talk about these issues. It's more like socially pushed. So, and you mentioned with regards to wokeism and tyranny and social division, that there is a link that we are not willing to completely talk about, but everybody sees that it's there. So I wanted you to elaborate on that.
Sure. Well, I think a lot of elements of what people call wokeism lead to social division and seek to exploit and magnify social division, primarily along lines, as you've stated, racial, ethnic, gender, sexuality, even. This ideology, it always finds these dividing lines and it continues to pit groups against each other. This is something it's not new. Prior to any form of woke ideology, human beings have always been tribal. Go back, look through history, look at the formation of every country, look at the way people used to treat each other in the past. You'll find that human beings have always divided each other along different lines: racial, ethnic, national, religious, political, so on and so forth. And we are naturally tribal creatures to different degrees. That's something that, to me, in itself is quite neutral. It's not necessarily good or bad. There's good aspects to tribalism, but when taken to an extreme, it can become genocidal, very literally. And so there's always a balance to be had, but you have certain actors in society, be they activists or politicians or even people in the media, exploiting these division lines and making people feel some type of grievance or resentment or animosity towards another group. This is something that you can see with something like the modern day iterations of what some people call feminism, right? It's very anti-male. It's not simply just saying, okay, we want equality between the sexes. It can go into, men are trash. Let's smash the patriarchy. Let's, women are better, so on and so forth, right? You can see this along national lines, political lines, religious lines. It can manifest in all sorts of different ways. But I think that when you make people hyper conscious of the differences between them rather than the similarities and the things that actually they have in common, then I think it's a great trick for somebody who wants to have more power. Divide and conquer is an age-old tactic. But for someone who's trying to strive towards social cohesion and civility and people treating each other decently, I don't think it's helpful for them to say, sit down and try to, as I'm talking to you, I'm not talking to you thinking, of course I can see what you look like. You can see what I look like. But I imagine the top thing in our brain right now isn't, oh, we have different skin color, or we're from a different nationality. Right. Like that's not the primary thing we're thinking of. But there are people who think that it should be, or they want it to be, right? And through doing that, they cause division, especially in between groups. And like I said, in terms of the tyranny aspect, it's a power play. So if you can get people fighting against each other and bickering over immutable characteristics and stuff that doesn't really matter, then they never unite, they never come together. And that, I think, leads to the tyranny to some degree, because it allows people to play off each other. And obviously a fragmented society is a lot easier to control than one that is united and solid and willing to stand together.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And actually, my next question, I wanted to paraphrase what you said in the conversation with Douglas Murray. Quote from Zuby: if you focus on race and I convince myself that the most important thing about me is that I'm black and the most important thing about you is that you're white and we're exclusive member of some group and you are oppressing me, I just don't see how holding this view and looking at the world through this lens can bring us any kind of happiness or joy. So what I want to ask you, to such minded person, what would your alternative to such a worldview look like?
Just don't do it. I think, look, there are a lot of things that are interesting about people. What's really funny with the sort of concept of this intersectional ideology is that it simultaneously makes a correct point, but then uses it, goes way overboard, and sort of comes to the wrong conclusion. So if you want to talk about the concept of being a minority, right? The ultimate minority is always the individual, right? Every single one of us is a minority because no two people in this world are identical. We all have all of these different traits that make us unique and special and give us something different that we can offer the world, which is really, really cool. You can't just see two black men or two white men and then you assume, okay, well, they're the same and they think the same or they have the same character. Right? Like it doesn't tell you anything, right? It's the most one of the least interesting things about somebody actually is literally what skin color that they have. Like it doesn't tell you anything. All it tells you is the geographic location that their ancestors are from, right? Someone could look at you and say, okay, this is someone with European ancestry. Someone could look at me and go, oh, okay, this is someone with African ancestry, right? That's as interesting as it is. That's really what it tells you. It doesn't tell you my beliefs, my behavior, my character, and my talents, my abilities. It doesn't say anything. And this is actually why the sort of old school version of racism was always stupid, right? Because you're taking a whole hundreds of millions of people and you're saying, oh, all of these people are like this. All of these people are like that. And it's like, wait, that's so crazy because everyone's an individual. Everyone is unique. So to just say that everyone who shares this one trait, like very surface level, has this personality or these beliefs or they behave this way, it's a totally crazy idea. So I think one of my big problems with wokeism is they've sort of taken that and they've just done a new version of it. Right.
Yeah, right.
It's the same type of thinking, right? All white people are like this, or all black people are this, etc.
And also, I thought the objective and the goal was always to get to a colorblind society, and it was quite interesting. I actually did studying abroad program in Boston, in which I came to America, and I was like, we need to think about the world in terms of not through the lens of you are white, you're black, I'm white. Mm-hmm. But then I learned that was actually the new racism, and I was like, "What on earth are we talking about?" I thought that was the goal.
Oh, so they were discouraging you from being colorblind.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, because I had some kind of, because I was from Iceland, and I had some kind of a hidden motive coming to America as a white person to really oppress African Americans, and it's like, where does this lead? Where does this lead?
It's not. It's not good for anybody. This is the thing. It's not good for anybody, right? It's because it makes no one wants to be accused of something they're not guilty of, right? So treating people as if they're inherently bigoted or oppressors or they're guilty of something, right? Like it annoys people, right? It annoys people because it's like, no, like I'm not, right? If someone accuses me of something I haven't done, something bad I haven't done, then I'm not going to be happy. On the flip side as well, if you're telling people that they are inherently victims of society or that there's this other group that's out there to bring them down or to put the boot on them, or it's not, that also makes people feel like they're lesser than. It makes them feel like, like second class citizens. Or maybe, I mean, look, think about it. If you're playing a game, any sport, even a board game, whatever, and the rules are not fair, right? And you're led to believe that the rules are not fair, then you won't even try as hard in the game because you feel like, well, the rules aren't fair. I'm disadvantaged. The game is set up for me to lose. So why should I even try? And unfortunately, there are people who buy into this narrative, and it means that they never meet their own potential because they're so convinced that the whole thing is against them, and no matter what they do, no matter how hard they work, how good their decisions are, they're always going to be, they're always going to be lesser than, and that's how people are going to see them, and that's how people are going to treat them. I don't think it's true. Not only it's two things. I number one, I don't think it's true. I think this is categorically false, and also I don't think it's helpful. Right? Even if this were true, and you could say, okay, let's go back to, I don't know, 1930 in the USA. Absolutely 100% true, undebatable, that society was set up to advantage white Americans over black Americans. I don't think anyone...
Nobody disputes that.
Nobody disputes that, right? But even in that time, if you want someone to succeed, you still wouldn't want them to believe that that's not possible. Sure, they may acknowledge a certain prejudice or disadvantage, but you would still want to convince that person, hey, you know what, despite this, even if you work hard, if you make good decisions, whatever, right, that would actually be a better message in terms of helping that person out. So, but in 2021, I think this is moot. This is not saying that, there's no form of bigotry or racism or sexism or whatever anywhere in the world. Of course there is, but I think it would be great if people recognize the huge amount of progress that actually has been made towards equality and people treating each other decently and fairly. I think it would be great if we acknowledge that rather than just speeding so past it so quickly that we end up going around full circle and creating the problem that we started with again, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this is something that I have a problem with regards to this issue, because I know you think a lot about mindset, and you think that the victim mentality is not going to make any kind of path to any progress. So that's why I think that people like you who are black and are talking like this are such a glitch in the system of modern day progressivism. And I mean, you probably looked at Thomas Sowell and Shelby Steele and all of these. I mean, you've talked to the Hodge twins, and it's so interesting that the modern day progressives, they don't even want to debate these people because they need them not to exist. And this is why I think black people who talk a certain way are such an uncomfortable phenomenon to modern day progressives, because you don't want to comply to the rules and demands that you're a victim. You don't want to play by these rules. Yeah. So how has this been in your experience? Are the people willing to debate you, or are you just put aside and treated like some kind of outlier with a tinfoil hat?
It's a good question. It's not something that I personally worry about too much. It's something that I tend to encounter more online than in the real world. I have had experiences online which sort of run parallel to that. And I think that, it's a tricky one. You do get people who mean well, and they're misguided, or they've kind of bought into an ideology so hard that they can't operate outside of this very narrow confines. So like you said, they see something that doesn't fit the perfect mold, and it's like a glitch to them. And they sort of they want to stick to the narrative no matter what. This is how you get crazy things like having, black people being called white supremacists and whatever, because they're so stuck in this narrative and framework and dogma that they would rather believe that there's such a thing as a black white supremacist.
Yeah, Dave Chappelle is one. You haven't heard.
Yeah, they'd rather believe that, right? This is totally ridiculous, right? But they would rather believe that or pretend they do than entertain the idea, okay, maybe my worldview and perspective here is not correct. Maybe it's not as simple as white people are privileged and black people are oppressed, and that's just how it is, right? That's not correct. And then also, look, I think that anybody who is trying to convince you that you are lesser than, or that you are not able to fulfill a great potential, or that, everything is set up and against you and no matter what you do, as far as I'm concerned, anyone who's trying to convince you of that is not your friend. Right. That's not your friend. That's not your ally. It doesn't matter what it is. I'd say the exact same thing to, a woman or someone who's, LGB or whatever it is, right? It's like, look, if someone is trying to convince you that the whole game is rigged against you, right? Or you're a woman, so there's this thing called the patriarchy, and it's always going to have the boot down on you, and you're never going to be able to do, is that the message you want to send? And also, it creates animosity and it creates resentment, which is why you have people who have this animosity against, there's people who have animosity against white people, or they have animosity against men and males in general, or they have an animosity against this group or that group because they've been told, typically this used to happen, especially in the earlier 1900s, along class lines, right? It was all class warfare, Marxism. It's, those rich people, right? They're the reason why they stole from you. They robbed you. The reason why you're not as successful is because those greedy people, took your stuff. It foments division. It foments hostility. And look, I'm a very positive person. So anything that foments hostility and division, it always sets off my alarm bell, right? It sets off my alarm because I'm thinking, wait, hang on. Why is someone trying to create animosity and division and force neighbors or friends or family members to look at each other with suspicion, or to think that people have, a bad motive, or they're out to get them or hold them down, whatever. It's nothing new. We've seen this play out many times all throughout history. Exactly. And the result is not good. The result is not good. So I'm generally just like, look, let's not do that again. We've made a lot of mistakes in the past as human beings. Let's actually move forward. If you want to talk about being progressive, let's actually progress. Let's not go backwards.
Yeah. That's what Douglas Murray, I think he's back in 2015 with Sam Harris, like progressing towards what?
Yeah.
That's the question you need to answer. But I mean, that is the reason why I find you so fascinating, and people like Glenn Lowry and John McWhorter and all of these writers who have just created a renaissance of incredible data about the real horrors that have been happening to the African American society for the past few decades. But I mean, I don't know if you read the Anti-Racism by Ibram X. Kendi and White Fragility by
I haven't, but I probably will block out a week one day in my life and put myself through the training.
I did that, and the incredible predictability that one observes when listening or reading these people should give us an idea what is really going on. I mean, however, the way in which people are allowed to be called intellectuals while applying incredibly enigmatic and obscure words such as systematic racism and patriarchy, or white people need to do the work. It's astounding, and this is so far from being what we called intellectualism just a few years back.
Yeah, I agree, and I call it neo-racism. From what I've read of her work, I think Robin DiAngelo is probably one of the most racist people in America, right? And I think that what she's doing is she is projecting that onto everybody else. I've read some of her stuff and I'm reading it and I'm like, she'll say something that she thinks or she experiences, and then she'll assume that every white person also thinks the same thing. And I'm like, no, you just have an issue, right? Like most people don't go into this situation and have this going on in their mind, and you are now projecting this across entire populations of hundreds of millions of people. Which again, like I've said before, is never going to be accurate. People are so diverse and so unique, and all have these different experiences and characteristics. So making huge, broad assumptions about any group, especially based on something immutable, right? This isn't even something like somebody could say all Christians believe in Jesus, right? And that's an accurate statement, or because it's like, all men are born with testicles, right? It's like, okay, you can make those kind of like broad claims.
Can you?
But when it comes to something that's like a characteristic of like someone's personality or experiences, right? There's also this notion that everyone has the same experience. There's this idea, again, in this weird neo-racist, progressive, woke worldview, that every Black person is poor, right? Or maybe was I remember speaking to one of these people once. This was hilarious because I don't think they didn't even realize. This shows how narrow their worldview is, right? This was someone who they thought I was American, okay?
Right.
And they said something, they said some weird woke point, and I pushed back against it. I think surprising them, because I think they thought that I would be, on board with them, because they think all Black people are, right? And then they said something about how they were surprised by my opinion. They said, oh my gosh, it's so funny. They said, they said something like, I can't believe you think that, especially as a descendant of slaves. So this person assumes I descended from slaves, right? I'm not even American, right? And not every black person in America descended from slaves. So in this person's view, it's like every black person is a descendant of slaves and is probably poor and has grown up in the inner city and had, it's like, it's very binary. And then on the flip side, you have these people who think like every white person is very rich and is there on their yacht sipping champagne and has never had any struggles, and everything in their life has just been easy. And just by existing in the real world, we know that this is complete nonsense. And then when you take concepts such as like these concepts of privilege, white privilege, male privilege, straight privilege, this privilege, that, and it's like, it's such a broad. I know proponents of this I know how they will defend it, because they'll say that it's, more of a lack of impediment rather than a true privilege. But it paints this very broad view as just like everyone in this demographic is this and has these benefits and these inherent advantages, and everyone in this demographic is like this, which is not very dissimilar to what people like the Ku Klux Klan used to say, right? It's like, it's actually like just they're actually saying a very similar thing, although one might be saying that it's genetic and another is saying that it's social or cultural, but really they're both coming up with the same notion, which is that, white people are essentially advantaged and perhaps superior in some way, shape, or form. And, people of color, to use their term, I hate that term, are disadvantaged and, need, of course, they now need their help. They have to come in as the savior and do something. And, before you try to save someone, it's worth checking if they actually want to be saved. And, checking your ego a little bit.
I mean, I think this particular issue, I think you have your finger on something very interesting, and I think this goes way deeper than just with regards to race relations, because I think because we have all of this kind of entertainment and we are on our phones all day, but we still want to be intellectuals, and we want to think that it takes no work to become an intellectual or smart about some issues. So the problems are very easily observable. It's easy to see that when George Floyd is killed by a white cop, there is a problem there, and we want to fix it. Something needs to happen. But we always want to think that because it's easily observable, the answer to this question is also very easily solved. And I think this is the problem with regards to COVID, with regards to race relations, even with regards to economic differences within societies. And for instance, what you were talking about just now, I mean, you had this similar discussion with the Hodge twins, who are political commentators who just grew out of, I think they just started posting on YouTube channel, and then they moved on to Facebook, and they have grown since then. And you mentioned that there is a whole continent of very conservative black people, and we are just prone to act like black conservatives in America and UK are just they're mentioned in passing while discussing politics and portrayed as some extremely rare epitome that barely exists. But I mean, as Coleman Hughes has mentioned in his writing, when you speak to African Americans, they lean very much towards conservative thinking, somewhat economically, but especially culturally.
Yeah. And look, I think people also forget, and I think Americans are most guilty of this, but they forget that Black Americans make up less than 5% of the Black population in the world, right? So when people hear the term Black, they automatically jump to, Black American in many cases. And it's like, hey, as we said, there's a whole continent called Africa, which has over a billion Black people in it. And this is something that's funny. I think this is an interesting thing I've noticed in the West, and I've noticed this with the whole COVID situation as well. So it's funny to link these things together, which is that the whole continent of Africa tends to get ignored unless it can be used for some form of narrative, right? And especially with anything positive. Like Africa is one of those countries that, sorry, what am I saying? Africa is one continent, 54 countries, that is only ever really spoken about in the West when there's something bad to report. right? When there's something bad, or when you can make people feel pity or something like that. And I think that there's this. I don't think it's intentional. I don't think it's intentional. I think some of it is just like a local focus. But I think that there's also this kind of arrogance in it. I think that in the West, especially, there's this notion, and I say this as well as somebody who grew up in the Middle East, but there's this notion that the West does everything better, right?
Yeah.
So everything across society, culture, politics, everything, the Western way, and I'm using that term a bit broadly, is always the best way. It's better than the way it's done in Asia. It's better than the way it's done in the Middle East. It's better than Africa. It's better than, it's the best. And I don't think it's right, first of all. But also I think it's really arrogant. I do think there are certain things that the Western world has done a fantastic job at, and that many other regions of the world could and should learn from. But I also think that there are things that in the West, especially in the modern West, have gone off kilter, and that they could take some lessons and some notes from other parts of the world. But there's this stubbornness about that. I mean, if you want to talk about the whole COVID situation, I mean, do. Okay. I mean, the continent of Africa has handled it better than, if you're talking about death rates and total deaths, Africa has breezed through this whole thing without all the mandates and lockdowns and, less than 5% vaccination rate. I believe, don't quote me on this, but I believe the entire continent of Africa has about the same number of COVID deaths, according to official statistics, as the UK, right?
Right.
And some people will just say, oh, it's a younger population. And it's like, yeah, there is a younger population. So that's one factor, but there's still tons and tons of elderly people there. My point is, like, look, we could go in lots of detail, from medical treatments to demographics, as to why that might be the case. But I find it amazing that 2 years into this whole situation, no one is even asking that question, right? Who is there in the media going, wait, hang on, what's going on in Africa? How come all of these countries have breezed through it? If you think about a super scary, global, deadly pandemic, you would think, your common sense would tell you that Africa would be one of the worst hit parts of the world, because there's more poverty. The infrastructure and the healthcare system is not even close to how it is in developed parts of the West. And also you've got multi-generational families living together. You have high population densities in some places, etc. But that wasn't the case. And I can guarantee that if people in Africa were dropping dead over this thing, then it would get a lot of media coverage. But because the opposite has happened, it's not mentioned. In fact, they're still going with the whole savior complex of, we need to send all these vaccines over to Africa to help them. It's like, they don't need help. Like, Africa should be helping. Africa should be helping Europe and North America. I mean, but no one, like I said, no one even wants to, see, like, okay, wait, what's going on here? I mean, that should have been done very early. So it's an interesting phenomenon. And I think, as someone who's grown up in multiple countries and across different cultures, I think that's why people sort of value my insights to some degree, because I just see things from a different perspective. My family is from Nigeria. I did grow up in Saudi Arabia. I lived there for a long time. I'm very familiar with, the UK and British culture. I'm very familiar with America and American culture, and they all have their pros and cons and their differences. Everything's different. I've been to Iceland before. I was only there for a couple of days, but as you know, if you travel, you'll find everywhere is a little bit different. There's different ways that they do things. The society is a bit different. The culture is a bit different. You might find some things you prefer. When you went to the USA, there's probably some things you prefer in the USA, but then there's some things you prefer in Iceland, and you can compare them and you can say, okay, I think we do this better. Maybe the USA could learn this from Iceland, and maybe Iceland could learn this from the USA. So it's just that level of humility and open-mindedness.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with respect to this issue, I think that is very important that we have differences and that we're able to learn from the like other cultures and stuff like that. I mean, I told my friend, and I mentioned this on the podcast, that when the vaccine came out, I said, this will be whites only. I mean, this will be the Western world only, and mark my words. And everybody was like, no, don't be this racist. I'm like, I promise you. I mean, we're talking about the fourth jab for Western countries. Well, like you said, it's like 5% in African countries. And
they're fine.
Really
that's the thing. They're fine.
Yeah, and they're fine.
Yeah.
So I mean, it was quite interesting. I've been following you during this period, and you've been traveling around when pretty much everyone was staying at home. So, in your experience, what was the most tyrannical place compared to the least tyrannical?
Okay, interesting. Okay, so this is going to be slightly inaccurate because I was in different places at different times, of course.
Right.
So I can't necessarily say what it was like at each time. But so, okay, over the past 18 months, I've been to the UK, USA, Greece, Romania, Portugal, Mexico, and I want to say somewhere else.
Turkey?
Oh, yes, Turkey, of course. Yes, Turkey. Yes, you got it for me. The most tyrannical when I was there, one of the weirdest was actually Portugal. I was in Portugal, I think May or June 2020. And that was the first place where I'd had people yell at me on the street for not wearing a mask outside, which is something that's never happened in the UK ever. So that was pretty strange. Like I couldn't see anybody's face, even outside. It's hot in the sun. Everyone, they had like a 95% masking rate outdoors, 100% indoors and 95% outdoors. So that was pretty weird. And people are a little bit aggressive with it. So that was strange. In terms of the most open, red states in the USA, Texas, Florida, Tennessee, totally normal. See the occasional mask here and there, but no regulations. Everything was just normal. Blue states in the USA, places like Hawaii, New York City, Los Angeles, Maryland, those were far less pleasant. Those were much more, way more mandates, way more fear, way more suspicion. Hawaii as well, even if I'm not sure I mentioned that one. So it's weird. It's especially weird in the US because it's all the same country. So it's weird how you can kind of go 2 hours north and suddenly it's totally different. And then you go this way and people's behavior is completely different. It's almost like the blue areas are dealing with a completely different virus to the red areas. Like people are living in these alternate realities. So that's very, very strange. What's it been like in Iceland, actually?
It's been pretty good. I mean, I've talked to Thorlo Gunnarsson, who is the chief epidemiologist here in Iceland, is pretty much our Fauci.
Okay.
And
but better, I presume.
It's been all right. I mean, they haven't been going for very harsh measures, but I think within the discourse, it has been pretty bad because people are willing to just give up their freedoms without question and shout at the people who raise questions.
Yes.
I mean, and Thorolfur, the epidemiologist, doesn't do that.
Okay.
But they create this climate. This climate of discourse and rhetoric that people allow themselves to talk to the fellow citizens, and that's actually I want to get into the philosophical aspects of this because I've listened to you on trigonometry, and I want you to re-raise some of the aspects of what you were saying there. And I want to get your thoughts on something that I mentioned on this podcast a few times, and it's with regard to this pandemic. It's provided us with a new image of what freedom is. Until recently, we thought of freedom as something where we were free to do whatever we pleased without the interference of the government. But now we've learned that really what we were living under was a permit to do whatever we wanted until the government felt they needed to step in. So I think, I mean, what are your thoughts on this? Do you think this is a new situation? Because I always thought that we had the freedom, but pretty much the message is that we never did.
Well, this is the funny thing, is that unless you're talking about absolute tyranny, freedom is largely in the mind, right? It's largely in the mind. So I've been living freely for the past 2 years, for the most part. There have been times where the rubbers met the road and something has like roadblocked me from doing something that I would like to do. Yeah. But I was never, there's people who didn't leave their house last year. Yeah. They weren't forced to not leave their house. They could have left their house, but they're trapped in this mental prison. There's still people like that. They're still very much living in this thing. A lot of people at this point, there's billions of people just living life as normal, back to life. Cool. Like whatever, let's just, let's go. And then there are still people, certainly millions, I don't know how to calculate these numbers, who are still very much imprisoned in their mind. And they also want other people to be imprisoned. So I think freedom is an interesting concept on multiple levels. So I think on an individual level, it's very much a mindset more than it is a real political concept. But then also, I think from the political angle, I think it's always up to you, individuals and the society, to defend your freedoms. Because look, I believe that the default for humanity always leans towards authoritarian. That's the default, right? Whether you're in a tribe, a monarchy, a dictatorship, whatever it is, human beings actually lean towards authoritarianism more than we lean towards liberty and freedom. That's why the foundation of the USA as a country, as flawed as it was for hundreds of years, in terms of actually extending these rights equally to everybody. But that's why, the USA, as far as I know, was, certainly the first big country that was not a dictatorship of some sort, right? Prior to that, it was all monarchs and kings and queens, or just dictators or tribal warlords or whatever it was. That's kind of the default human position. And I think that over time, especially in the West, people have become so comfortable and so complacent and so oriented around the idea of feelings and safety that's why they've been so quick. And it's been shocking how quickly and easily people have been willing to give up those freedoms to have that feeling of safety or comfort, and how aggressively they will police and even attack other people who don't have that mindset, right? So as someone who's pro-liberty and pro-freedom, throughout this entire 2 years, I haven't made a demand on anybody. I've made no demand on anyone. I haven't tried to tell anyone to cover their face or to stay in their house or to inject something into their bloodstream or do anything. I'm pro-liberty. It's like, look, if you want to stay at home and that makes you feel safer or you're vulnerable, I 100% support your right. You want to go out, you want to run your business, you want to go to the gym, I support that. You want to wear a mask? Cool. You don't want to? Cool. You want to take this jab or this treatment or whatever it is? Cool. Do what's best for you. Do what's best for you. We all have a different risk analysis. We're all in different demographics. We all have very, very different situations. And so I'm simply pro-liberty. And so it's been funny when I get people who, attack me or insult me or whatever, or, do this name calling, because I'm actually defending their rights. Yeah. Right. They're the ones who are trying to infringe on anyone. I'm simply supporting your rights. And that's the thing I think sometimes they miss in their brain. It's like, bro, I'm supporting your right. I'm trying to defend your right to just live and to not have this and that forced on you. But I think it's when people are very afraid, not only do they accept authoritarianism, but they demand it. And Lord knows, man, the amount of fear that was put into people all around the globe, especially in the early stages of it. Even now, they're still trying to, they've got the Omicron now, and now they're now trying to, the fear mongering isn't going as well as they want it to, I don't think. But they're still just trying to keep people in this permanent state of fear, because when people are afraid, they're always going to look up. They're always going to look up. And so they're going to look up to God. If God is not there, they're going to look towards some other authority. And oftentimes that is the state. That's the government. That's daddy government. And I think that's also why there's been such a religious, or I would argue more cultish angle to this whole thing, right? That's why you have Lord Fauci, and you have like people now talk about the science as if it's an institution or as if it's a religion now. It's not.
The science is settled, which is a thing that we didn't know before.
But also it changes.
Yeah, exactly.
The science changes, but it's also settled. So, people talk about science now as if it's as if it's just like a scripture. It's a doctrine, and you're not allowed to ask questions. You're not allowed to challenge it. You're not allowed to, which is the most anti-science thing that you can do, because science is all based around challenging and asking questions and, conversating. But in this case, it's like, no, shut this down, shut that down. You can't say this. There's only, it's literally masks good, lockdowns good, vaccine good, safe and effective, and COVID super deadly. Like that's all. Like that's the scripture. These are the commandments. And any deviation from that, somebody is going to attack you, right? If you say, even if you don't even say, oh, I don't think masks work, even if you just say, like I haven't seen a study showing the efficacy, or I'm not convinced, or doesn't make sense to wear them.
Or if you just say, not for me.
Yeah, no, exactly, right? Same, even worse with the injections, right? It's like they want to make it as simple as, if you want to be a good person, you must do this. And if you don't, you are a bad person. You are selfish. You want to kill people. You are pro-COVID. You want everybody to get infected and die. You're just a horrible person, right? If you know, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter your age, your risk factors, your health condition. None of this matters. If you take the vaccine, you are a good person. If you question it, if you challenge it, if you criticize it, if you say that it's not as effective or not as safe as maybe they can, you are now, we must burn you at the stake. We must punish you. And that's totally crazy. And I don't think this has ever happened, not in my lifetime anyway, with any disease or any treatment or any response, right? It's like, when it comes to, if you think about it, think with medicines and medicine interventions and even surgeries or even other, like, you're always allowed to talk about side effects. You're allowed to talk about the pros and the cons, but in this case, it's like, you're not supposed to. Like, you're not supposed to. Like, just asking a question or making a statement. There's people who have literally gotten the shot and they've had a bad reaction, and they said they had a bad reaction, and people are calling them anti-vax because they had a bad reaction. I mean, this is insane. Like, that's insane.
And also it's quite scary, the disconnect that we have in relations to our own freedoms. I mean, I think Czesław Miłosz, the Polish writer, said about, especially within the Stalinist context, that when you're using your freedom, you're paying the unpayable debt of the people's blood who fought for these very freedoms. And I want to go back to what you were talking about earlier when you talked about behaving as if you are a free person. And this is something Christopher Hitchens mentioned ad nauseum, is that when you use your freedom and when you're not willing to give in, you're signaling to the authority that you will put up a fight when they actually want to take away your freedom. And this is the fight that we just didn't even, there was no fight. There was no fight, and we were just willing to, yes, of course, I'm gonna stay inside. Of course, you can imprison me within my own home. I mean, of course, you can jab me. It doesn't matter what you want to do. You can do whatever you want. I'm not against vaccines, but I'm not willing to say to the authorities, yes, of course, you can lock people inside if they don't want to get the jab. Of course, you can treat them differently. I mean, we've gone down this road so many times, and it's just, we're not willing to look with this towards this from a broader perspective. Yeah,
well, we are, but many people are not. And look, it's a couple of things. You know, number one is that fear, I believe, is the most powerful human emotion. I think that fear is unbelievably powerful. If you can scare people about a real threat, a manufactured threat, or an imaginary threat, then you can really control their behavior. I'd actually say even more so in a group, because then you get that group think. I think it's actually harder to trick. It might be harder to trick an individual than to trick a group, right? Because there's the social conformity. Human beings like to conform. We like to be in the majority.
Peer pressure.
Exactly. If you go to a party and everyone is wearing red and you walk in wearing white, you might feel people feel weird, right?
What did I miss?
Yeah, exactly. People feel weird, even if there was no, you know, that maybe you didn't miss anything. Maybe like everyone just chose to wear that color, but now you're thinking, oh, like, you know, your brain starts running and thinking, oh, maybe I should go home and I should also wear red, right? And there've been many experiments done on this phenomenon. But I think that, you know, number one, the majority is not always correct. There are times when it makes sense to conform, and there are times when you shouldn't. But you should always be questioning. You know, I'm simply a big fan of inquiry. You know, inquiry, discussion, conversation. I'm humble enough to accept that I don't know the answer to everything. I don't know the answer to most things, but I have a lot of questions. Right? I have a lot of questions, or I can see things that don't make sense. If you tell me this one day, and then the next day you tell me the opposite, I'm going to go, wait, but yesterday you said this. So what is correct? If you said this 2 months ago and now you're saying this, or you want me to do this, but logically and rationally, it doesn't make sense. So why do you want me to do it? I'm simply here asking questions, trying to get explanations, because with this whole thing, man, and with much of life, I simply want to know the truth. That's my thing. I'm just interested in, okay, what is the truth? You know, what's the best argument on this side? What's the best argument on this side? And what is just simply objectively true, and there are huge things that we do not know. We don't know how many people have died we don't know how many people have died from COVID. We don't know. We don't even really have a great idea, right? So in the UK, I don't know how it's counted in Iceland. In the UK, it's counted as deaths within 28 days of a positive test.
No.
Okay. So that's not a great that's not a great number. Out of that, I don't know what percentage of those people, actually died from COVID, right? I don't know. I don't know the number. Is it 50%? Is it 20%? Is it 70%? Is it 80%? I don't know. And then imagine this across a global level. So we don't know. There's so many open questions, and some of them, these things we're learning right at the beginning of the year. People who were like, how long does the vaccine last for? And does it stop you catching it? Does it stop transmission? Because that's what they were saying at the beginning. They said, okay, it stops you getting it, stops. We now know that's not true. That's absolutely false. Okay. How long does it last? It's looking like, okay, it looks, depending on which one, it's looking like maybe 3 to 6 months, maybe, in terms of decent efficacy and protection of, getting the disease badly. So it's like, okay, well, but the thing is, the people who asked these, even had the temerity to ask these questions, were being attacked and still are, right? Even right now, if someone is just saying, wait, hang on, what about this? What about that? I'm worried about this. I have a question about that. Instead of someone explaining it to them, or someone saying, okay, this is the situation, it's just attack, label, name call. And when people do that, you also have to remember that it actually forces people harder into their position. If someone is genuinely out there who thinks that everyone should, for example, wear a mask, or for example, take this shot, or they think that, I don't know, everyone over 30 should take it, whatever it is, they should, they do themselves a massive disservice with the way that it's being done, because it's all attacking, name calling, insulting, demonizing. It's not like, okay, let's look at this. Let's look at the data. Let's look at the numbers. Let's explain this. This is how it goes by age. These are the pros. These are the cons. These are the risks of side effects. And we can talk about all this openly. We can do this with everything else. If you're going to go and have a surgery, you're going to get an explanation of, look, these are the potential benefits. These are the potential downsides. These are some risks. And then you can make an informed decision, right? I got my eyes lasered 5 years ago. I had so many questions. I was like, okay, what about this? What about that? Imagine if they just said, like, just shut up and do it, right? Just shut up and, no questions.
Whoa.
Yeah. All right. You want to put a laser in my eye and you don't want me to ask any questions, right? You'd be like, yo, that's kind of crazy. And so I think that actually I think the communication has been really horrible. Like, as someone who's a communicator, I guess, as a living in many ways, I think that the communication has been terrible. And also when you have these people who have been, who are still living in absolute fear, right? I've said before that everyone who's still afraid of COVID is double or even triple jabbed. And that's sending the wrong signal. Because again, if you believe that this is safe and it's effective and you think more people should take it, then acting like a frightened lunatic, despite the fact that you've taken it, and then screaming at everyone else to take it, doesn't instill confidence in those people to go, okay, well, this person is showing confidence with it. It's like you're acting like it doesn't work. And then you're trying to force that on someone else, and they're like, no, this doesn't make sense. It's not rational. So I think the communication's been really bad.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I know you interviewed Martin Kulldorff about this, and he actually says this in few interviews now, that the anti-vax message has been more amplified by the very people who are most pro-vaccines in the few.
Yes.
Like, they have done more work for anti-vaxxers than anti-vaxxers were able to do with like 2 decades. Absolutely.
And the thing is, it's so funny, this label anti-vax. Number one, of course, they've changed the definition to include the majority of people. Because have you seen they changed the
No, I haven't.
Oh, they changed the definition in the dictionary.
And what's it now?
Now it's not just people who are against vaccination, it's people who are against vaccine mandates.
Yeah, I saw that. That is insane.
That's 1984, man. That's Orwellian. Like they've literally gone and changed. They've literally gone and changed the meaning in the dictionary, so it now includes almost everybody. But this label is so silly, because yes, there are people who are like absolutely against all vaccines. I do know a few people like that, but it's a small minority, right? But what they've done is they've just thrown this label at everybody, and then of course changed the dictionary definition. And now it makes it harder to have a proper, nuanced conversation, right? If someone tells me that they are vegetarian or they're vegan, and then I say, "Oh, so you're anti-food," right?
Yeah.
You'd be like, "Are you what? Are you insane?" But this is what people are now doing. They're even labeling people who have taken not just other vaccines, but these ones. They're still labeling them anti-vax if they don't want to force it on everybody, or maybe they took 2 but they don't want the third one, or maybe they took 3 and they don't want 4, right? And so I don't know. I think something that ties all this together, all this conversation we've been having. I think a lot of it is it's intellectual immaturity. Yeah, it's sometimes you're talking to someone on these things, and it's like talking to a toddler, like a child. It's just just all the straw manning and the name calling and the insulting and the very binary approach. If you're not 100% here, you're 100% there. There's nothing in the middle. There's no nuance. There's no gradations, whatever it is. It's just this good, that bad. And it's very I don't know what's happened in people's minds, but it's very juvenile. It's like we've sort of regressed back to the schoolyard of name calling and false dichotomies and straw manning people's positions, and rather than just actually looking at the facts, listening to people's arguments and their points, and being able to discuss them and debate them without being rude, without being aggressive, without trying to demonize people, whatever it is. And I think that's a shame.
And imagine the messaging. I mean, if you're that confident in your own rhetoric and your own narrative, you ought to be able to take on any kind of issue, and you should be able to take any kind of argument and demolish it. If you're that certain about any aspect of your argument, you ought to be able to take that on. But instead, it's just like, no, that can't be heard. We need to censor this, and this is a bad person.
Yeah, exactly. And look, there's nothing that I believe, especially nothing that I believe strongly, that I'm not willing to defend my position, and which I'm not able to, and which I haven't thought about from different angles. That's how I personally operate, right?
And if I'm wrong, I want to know.
Oh, yeah. Look, I'd rather I'd rather, how would I put this? I think some people care more about being right than being correct.
Yeah.
I'd rather
Stephen Fry, I think.
Okay, I want to be correct. Like I want to know what is the truth. If I have something I believe, even if I put a statistic out there and I say something and then someone's like, "Oh no, that's not correct. It's actually this." I'll be like, "Okay, good, thank you." Like, let me integrate that. That's literally how we learn. I think everything that we know because we were wrong at some point, right? Like we're brought into this world almost knowing nothing. Even just learning your own native language, you learn by being wrong. You make mistakes, you say things that don't make sense, you get corrected. You go through school, whether you're learning math or history or geography, whatever, you make mistakes, you make an assumption, it's incorrect, you learn. And that's literally how we all learn. But now it's like people are so prideful and there's so much ego that it's like, I understand it. I like being correct. I like being right. I want to say something and I want to be right. I want to have the better argument. But sometimes there's stuff that I just don't know or that I'm incorrect about. In fact, with most things in the world, I don't know most things about most things. Like my level of ignorance is as much knowledge as I have. There's so much more that I'm ignorant about. But
that's good.
Yes,
I mean, that's the beauty of the world.
Exactly. But also if I'm ignorant about something, I'm not going to speak on it with such authority and confidence. I'd rather sit back and listen, right? Like, okay, right. I don't know all the, I'm not going to come and lecture about the history of Iceland. I don't know the history of Iceland. So like if there's people out there who are subject matter, so I'm like, okay, I will listen to them. And then maybe after listening to them, I can repeat something that they said, or I can go and do my own research. But I don't have the things I have strong opinions on. It's because I've thought about it. I've thought about it. I've discussed it. I've listened to people with different opinions, and I've thought, okay, I think this is correct.
Yeah, and I mean, even if you would say anything about Iceland, and I would listen and either correct you or try and gain some more access to more information. I wouldn't immediately just tell you, no, Zuby, you don't know anything about Iceland. Now shut your mouth.
You're anti-Icelandic.
Yeah, exactly.
Why do you hate Iceland? Why do you hate Icelandic people?
Never come here.
You must be anti-Iceland.
Yeah, and I think the Stephen Fry quote is, most people want to be right and be effective, and it's within the context of the political correctness crowd. But I have a quote from you that actually amplifies this as well. Is that quote, once they made up their mind, most people would rather commit to being wrong than admit they were wrong. And I think that just encapsulates everything that we're discussing with regards to all of the issues that we've talked about. Yeah. And I really want to go on. I want to be respectful of your time. Do you have some more? Do you have some more time?
I've got another call in 10 minutes. So
all right. So I want to use that 5 minutes just to get you, because I know that you mentioned abortion within the context of Iceland, and I know that you're at least not vehemently pro-abortion.
I'm pro-life.
You mentioned,
I'm vehemently anti it.
So what is your what is the most persuasive argument for the pro-life position?
I think the most persuasive argument is that human life is inherently valuable and sacred, and it is wrong to intentionally take the life of an innocent, defenseless human being, regardless of their age, size, or location. I think that human life should be protected from beginning to end. Everybody agrees on this for the most part once somebody is born, and people who are pro-life simply believe that should be extended all throughout. So to me, that's the position. For me to be against that, I would either have to deny the humanity of certain human beings, which is not logical, rational, nor scientific, or I would have to accept the notion that sometimes it's okay to kill an innocent, defenseless human being out of convenience or practicality, which is not in the realm of my moral framework.
Right. I just wanted to get a little bit of thoughts on it. I have a lot to say about it, but
it's a big topic.
I'm reluctantly pro-abortion or the pro-freedom of the women, but maybe we'll discuss that later.
Yeah, we can do that one another time.
Absolutely. For those who would like to hear more of this voice, where would you direct them?
Sure thing. So I'm on all social media at Zuby Music. I'm very active on Twitter. I'm also on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. And if you want links to everything I do, my music, my podcast, my merchandise, if you go to zubymusic.com, then you can find links to everything on there.
Absolutely. Beautiful. Zuby, thank you so much for coming. Until next time, keep fighting the good fight.
100%.